I am come of the seed of the people that sorrow, that have no treasures but hope, no riches laid up but the memory of an ancient glory. My mother bore me in bondage my mother was born. I am the blood of serfs. The children with whom I have played, the men and women with whom I have eaten, have had masters over them. They have been under the lash of masters, and though gentle, have served churls. I am flesh of the flesh of these lowly. I am bone of their bone, I that have never submitted, I that have spoken with God on top of his holy hill. And because I am of the people, I understand the people. I am sorrowful with their sorrow. I am hungry with their desire. But now I speak being full of vision. I speak to my people and I say to my people's masters, beware. Beware of the thing that is coming. Beware of the risen people who will take what ye would not give. Did ye think to conquer the people? That law is stronger than men's desire to be free? We will try it out with you, ye that have harried and held, ye that have bullied and bribed, tyrants, hypocrites, liars. That is an abridged version of The Rebel by Pádraig Pearse, who was executed by the British in 1916. And obviously the 100th anniversary is coming up here in 2 years' time. An abridged version, partly because, we've got 20 minutes, and partly because I didn't want you to kind of just all bail. So it is. Now, I like to say, never had a creative idea over a cup of coffee. I was awake, but no creative ideas. So just a wee little drop, you know. How do you think all these rock bands and so forth got these great songs and albums? You think it was from drinking coffee? No, they might have also been smoking a little bit, but you know, we're not going to even go there. So anyhow, sláinte, and thank you for coming out this morning. And Tess, thank you, and everybody else. So. It is. As Tess mentioned, so heritage. The Rebel by Pádraig Pearse and what it represents in terms of 800 years of Irish history has a significant amount to do with our heritage. Now, how many of you out there on your tags, I just noticed the tags earlier, how many of you have put a drink item for Ireland that reminds you of Ireland on your tag? Come on, put them up. Don't get them up. Okay. How many put something musical up there? A few more. River dance. Anybody put river dance up there? No. Okay. Good. Excellent. So it is. So Irish history, 300 years of the Vikings from 800 to 1100, and then 800 years of the British, and they still haven't quite left the country. It influences so many of the what I would call the non typical heritage things that one thinks of. You think of Ireland, people are going to go back and look for their roots, and they're going to go and see the dolmens, and they're going to go to see the Book of Kells at Trinity College, and they're going to go to the GPO and many, many other sites, the Giant's Causeway, all part of the heritage, and a lot to do with the Celtic heritage from 5,000 years ago. I'm sure many of you know, but for any of you who don't know, the Celts came from Eastern Europe about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. And of course, those old Scandinavians came down and spent 300 years in Ireland. Dublin means Blackpool in Norwegian, and 3 of the 4 provinces of Ireland are all derivative of Norwegian words. And so those black-haired Celts and those blonde Scandinavians got together, and they gave us some two gingers, eventually. So they do. And all of these little connections. But the softer side of heritage, and this is where I feel for me it rose really into the creative side. So I think of the oral tradition. And so the schools were banned in Ireland by the British in the 1700s. The Irish language was squashed. It is still Gaelic is still the official language of Ireland, and it's on all the signposts for any of you who haven't been there. It's also all the laws come out the very first time in Irish, and then they're followed by English, even though most people everybody speaks English in Ireland, and it is of commerce. It is the main language of the daily life of Ireland. It is the main language as well. So the schools are closed, the Irish language is squashed, and that's where the oral tradition, and I think it has, and we're not going to go into it today, but it's probably a lot of significance on why Ireland proportionately has more Nobel Prize winners in literature than really any other country that's out there. You have obviously tremendous music. So the story, the dance, river dance, without, it has brought some good. So it has. And so you take all of these creative things, the oral tradition in particular for myself, and goes through to the poetry and then the music and the dance and the sports of Ireland. And you wrap those things around a pub, the public house. The public house, or as I would call it, the egalitarian gathering spot. The public houses really were people's own houses back in the certainly 1800s. They became the community centre. And out of that, then you would get maybe the local little dance hall, the ballroom of romance, as it was referred to. And then it would go on, and people then, obviously the exports, the Irish people being exported. I mean it being exported because they're still being exported. But through the famine in the 1850s, and then going on to certainly mass immigration out of Ireland in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and a little bit again in this past 5 or 6 years because of the demise of the Celtic Tiger. So all of these people, it's about 12% of the US population claim some form of Irish heritage. And so, you're talking somewhere in the region of 40 million people or so claim it. And so you have all these people coming from Ireland, myself having been one of them. I had spent a number of years working in Saudi Arabia after leaving college, leaving Ireland, worked in Riyadh and helped launch a dairy products brand called Al Marai. No thanks to myself or the 3 other guys that went out there at the time, but it's probably the most successful indigenous brand in all of the Persian Gulf today, and it's a large public company now over there. Well, that kind of what I would call that immersion in this very foreign culture, because I grew up without television as well. My mother was a voracious reader, and she had a great imagination, and would talk and read about foreign places to myself and to my sister, but not having television. And really there was a cinema in town that, there'd be a movie once in a blue moon would show up in it. And so getting immersed in Saudi, I think it was kind of an awakening to me at a relatively early age to think about heritage and what did it actually mean to be Irish, and what were the things that I particularly identified with as being Irish, because we were in this culture. Obviously the foreign culture was Arabic, but there was also a heavy US, British, French, German, and some Asian, particularly from the Philippines, influences there as well, and we were a very small slice of this culture over there. And we would sit around, because there are no pubs in Saudi. I like to joke that 37 years ago I was flogging milk to the Arabs, and now 37 years later flogging whiskey to the Yanks. And while it may not sound like progress, if it was the other way around, I'd be the one getting flogged, seeing that whiskey was illegal there. So we would sit around in the compound or the villa, some Aston Villa. And we would drink maybe a bottle of Johnny Walker Red that had the smell of diesel off it, because it would come through in the false diesel tanks from over the Jordanian mountains and come into Saudi, and you buy it for, at the time, about $30 a bottle. So you'd have to take it, pour it into a jug and get rid of this diesel smelling, because whiskey actually tasted and smelled not that great at the time either, to somebody in his early 20s like myself who had never tasted it, but it's all that was available. So we would sit around, and honestly, again, with no television, and there were about a half a dozen of us, and from different parts of Ireland, and talking, and it became the stories, and it became the poetry, and it became some of the songs. More of the songs, the more of the lower the bottle went on it, and sports, obviously, and discussions on these things. So they'd come into America and eventually kind of saying, God, I want to do something on my own. And, you know, George Bernard Shaw said, an Irishman, if he was still alive today, he would probably say an Irish person is nothing if not their imagination. And he related that imagination back to, again, the fact that the Irish people did not own their own land. The schools were banned, the language was banned. And so when you're under that level of oppression, I think, and the families are very tight-knit, and there is of great value as well for education, and they had the hedge schools, and the hedge schools were basically, you get the smartest or most learned person in the whole region and so forth, and they would teach kids in the woods and out in the fields in the hedge schools. And so when you get that appreciation for that, I think the creativity and the imagination, and so the imagination then starts to, you know, it's in your head, it is, and you start to think about things, and you start to imagine, and bringing it back into a work situation. Well, I guess imagination, I mean, certainly for myself, when you have like things like innovation and that, I mean, I don't know how you can have innovation without imagination, because really the imagination is really about imagining what is it a sort of a world. I mean, you're in the creative worlds, all of you. What sort of a world do you want to create for the people, the customers, potential customers that are out there? So looking at pubs, eventually I kind of said, well, there are no Irish pubs here in town. Maybe that's what I'll do. I'll open one of those. And somebody said, well, do you have any experience in a pub? I said, well, I worked in Val Rattigan's bar in Ballyhonus when I was 15. Val Rattigan's bar is about the size of that office. And you fit about 15 people in. And they said, well, that must have been good experience. And I said, well, not really, because there were only 2 ingredients in every drink, and one of them was a glass. And so there was no ice, there was no straws, no napkins, no fruit. Nobody suffered from scurvy in Ballyhonus. They ate their fruit, their vegetables, maybe not so much of the fruit. And so, but it was really about how do you create an environment that really would be very reflective, even if it was in a larger environment than what really I had grown up with and what I had experienced. And what I loved to do when I went back to Ireland, it was my favorite thing to do, was to go to the pub. And anywhere I go in the world, pretty much you can find an Irish pub anywhere, so you can. And I think they are successful for that very reason, because they are egalitarian gathering spots. I used to chat with the guys at work and say, if you ever see a homogenous crowd in the pub, other than, you know, after midnight, it tends to skew pretty young for sure, but a homogenous crowd, not a great sign. So it's not, you're missing something if it's not reflective really of the community that we live in. And so creating the pubs, and how do you bring that in? We started out, God, I remember at Kieran's, we had theatre, we had the Titanic players, again a bit of the dark humour of the Irish, because the Titanic was built in Belfast. We used to like to say, built by an Irishman, sunk by an Englishman. So it was, yep, it was all right when it left here, so it was, you know. And this is where the creative side of the Irish comes into it. The fact that there wasn't a single Catholic worked at Harland and Wolff in Belfast that built the Titanic, but we can still turn it to our advantage when we kind of need it, when it's to slag off the English. And so, and I don't give the, I'm fine with the English. I have 6 first cousins that were born and raised there, and it also put me through college, because I worked in London on the building sites every summer growing up. But, you know, it's kind of fun. It's like, you know, if you're from Minnesota and you slag off Wisconsin, you know, it's like, you know, might be a little bit more serious than the Irish-English thing, but, you know, whatever. And so, how do you, again, one of the values that we had in the pubs, and it wasn't a question of writing the values down and putting them up. It's, how do you start to kind of live them, and how do you bring some things into the fold? And so as we began to open new pubs, people would say, particularly certainly with Cooper, well, it doesn't feel like an Irish pub. Or they might say, the local, well, I never saw a pub that was that big in Ireland, or the Wood, or whatever else it is. There are some that are that big. But there's all sorts in Ireland. And so it was really more about what is the feeling that you get when you come into the pub? Is it, when I talk to people all of the time that go to Ireland, and for 20 years, and they say, what should I do, and so forth. They've gone to a point now that I have my standard letter, and then I'll slightly modify it and so forth for people to go and do, and obviously send them to the distillery nowadays. But when people come back, invariably the two things they say, oh my God, it's beautiful, and the people are so friendly. It is almost universal that is what they say. And so that is significant to myself in terms of the heritage of a country and what it really stands for and the culture of the place. And so when I think of globalization today, and obviously it's a very overused word nowadays, but it's true. We are living in a global world. And so I think even heritage and the role creativity plays with heritage is probably even more important today than it has ever been, because I think the heritage for myself is really about what you bring to the community that is truly from your soul. It is something that you have a feeling that I can bring this and have it woven in to the fabric of the community that I work with. And I think heritage and the creative side of it is so important. And the creative side, really, and the creative world is what really keeps heritage, I think, alive, because it is the movies, it is the ad world, it is all of our images, etc. It is the music, etc. And so you get those things woven into the fabric, and I think it becomes, for me, the strength of the community is so much it's more vibrant for sure, and I think it's more tight-knit and stronger. And then each generation, or each new culture that comes in, they bring their own layer. And even the Irish culture, because I see my own kids who were born in Ireland but grew up here, what it is that they are bringing, and it is distinctly different than what I have brought to our own family and to our friends, and certainly to our business and the work that we have done. And so again, the heritage, for me, it's about digging back in, because I almost feel sometimes like I'm not really a kind of a business guy. I feel like I'm scamming a little bit, because it's really about ideas, and it's about trying things, and it is about asking questions. It is about never, it's like improvisation. Yes, and there is no end to the thing. Let's have a discussion. Well, what else? And how about this? And how about that? Now, that also gets one in trouble. Well, it certainly gets me in trouble, so it is, because I'm like the dog that used to chase the car in the west of Ireland. There weren't too many cars, chase the car, and I used to wonder, what in the name of God would he do if he ever caught it? He'd be going like this. Well, most of the time I feel I'm going kind of like this, so it is, and one of these days it's got to stop, I suppose, That's when you're 6 feet under. So is there something like that? So out of this heritage, it's been a great field for me to mine in terms of ideas and businesses. And so now, even though I'm still heavily involved with Two Gingers, we've also started a new business in Northeast Minneapolis. It's called Food Building. Building. So Food Building, and we've got Red Table Meats are over there. We're in the fucking world's biggest dogfight with the USDA at the moment. Sorry about the French. I just remember that you are recording it, but I'm sure you got bleep qualities, right? And so forth with it. And we're in a dogfight with them over there, where we're taking pigs, working with Mike Phillips. Mike's a great guy, talented salumi maker, and so we get pigs. We've got 15 coming in this morning, and we use 100% of the pig to make salami. We're the only USDA plant making salami in this region. And again, it's a lot to do it, and prosciutto, etc., etc. Mike is superbly well trained. We're opening up a creamery there as well, Skyway Creamery, taking milk from grass-fed cows, and that's going under construction next week. And so we're looking to really say, how, again, do you take things that there's a feeling that certainly for myself that goes back into my roots and back into a farm community in the west of Ireland, obviously the Saudi and the milk and the dairy products over there as well. So it seems to go full circle, all of these things, and it's kind of go around and round, and it's okay, pubs, meat, dairy. Where will it all end up? Well, where it all is going to end up is where I decided, this is 35, this is 40 years ago probably now, the field that I worked in for my father when I was growing up. I still own the field. I just couldn't quite let go of it. Everything else has gone, the house, etc. My parents have gone as well. And my parents were 48 and 43 when I was born, and they were third cousins. And so my kid says that any wonder I ended up the way I am. And so by the time I was 12, my father was 60. So he was the supervisor on the job as I'm working out in the field. Well, we had this field, and we grew everything that you could possibly grow in Ireland, all the root vegetables. We grew all of our food for the year there in that field. And then there was another field around the corner, and it was the graveyard. And then there was a jet stream that used to go across the sky, and on a blue sky day in Ireland in the summertime, and there weren't a whole lot of them, there's an awful lot more of them nowadays than actually there were back then, you'd see the jet stream going across. And with my mother, who left school at 14 years of age, a voracious reader, and she would talk about foreign lands, like I made reference to earlier, but she never left Ireland. She was never on a boat or a plane in her life. Died at home and is buried there. She lived to be 88. And she is one of the two gingers. Her sister, who lived to be 94 and traveled the world and never married, is the other two ginger. And so she would talk about these foreign lands. She had a great imagination for it. And I would look at that jet stream, and I used to say to myself, here's the deal. You get on that jet stream, and you try and put as much time between this field that I'm working in and that field over there that I'm going to end up in. And there's much time as I can put. So far, so good, but I don't take it for granted, so I don't, that we're going to put it, but all that, I don't know that I'm going to make it. You go around doing all of this shenanigans, pubs and drinking whiskey and eating meat and cheese and stuff like that. It can't end up well, so I can't, combining them all together. And so putting that amount of time between it, I will have to say that I consider myself very fortunate, very lucky, and for eternally grateful that this is the town that I ended up in for a significant amount of time of that journey between those two fields. So with that, I'll shut up, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If anybody wants some whiskey, just come on, let's go. So thank you very much for coming out.